Page 20. His phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and picked up. Ahmad, how are you? Zeitoun said in Arabic. Ahmad and Zeitoun's older brother and closest friend. He was calling from Spain, where he lived with his wife and 2 children, both in high school. It was late where Ahmad was, so Zeitoun worried that the call might bring grave news. What is it? Zeitoun asked. I'm watching the storm, he said. You scared me. You should be scared, Ahmad said. This one could be for real. Zeitoun was skeptical, but paid attention. Ahmad was a ship captain and had been for 30 years, piloting tankers and ocean liners in every conceivable body of water, and he knew as much as anyone about storms, their trajectories and power. As a young man, Zeitoun had been with him for a number of those journeys. Ahmad, 9 years older, had brought Zeitoun on as a crewman, taking him to Greece, Lebanon, South Africa. Zeitoun had gone on to work on ships without Ahmad, too, seeing some of the world in a 10-year period of wanderlust that eventually brought him to New Orleans and to his life with Kathy. Ahmad clicked his tongue. It really does seem unusual, big and slow-moving. I'm watching it on the satellite, he said. Ahmad was a technophile at work, and in his spare time he paid close attention to the weather, to developing storms. At the moment he was at his home in Malaga, a beach town in the Spanish Mediterranean, in his cluttered office, tracking this storm making his way across Florida. Hey, they have begun evacuating? Ahmad asked. Not officially, Zeitoun said. Some people are leaving. And Kathy, the kids? Zeitoun told him they hadn't thought about it yet. Ahmad sighed. Why not go? Just to be safe. Zeitoun made a non-committal sound into the phone. I'll call you later, Ahmad said. Zeitoun left the house and walked to the next job, 1 block over. It was often like this, multiple jobs in close proximity. Clients seemed so surprised to work with a painter or contractor they could trust and recommend that through referrals, and in rapid succession, Zeitoun would get 6 jobs in any given neighborhood. The next house, which he'd worked on for years, was across the street from home of Anne Rice, the writer. He had not read her work, but Kathy had. Kathy read everything, and was as stately and gorgeous a home as existed in New Orleans. High ceilings, a grand winding staircase descending into the foyer, hand-carved everything, each room themed with a distinct character. Zeitoun had painted and repainted probably every room in the house, and the owner showed no sign of stopping. He loved to be in that house, admiring the craftsmanship, the great care put into the most eccentric details and flourishes. A mural over the mantel, one-of-a-kind ironwork on every balcony. It was this kind of willful, wildly romantic attention to beauty, crumbling and fading beauty needed constant attention, that made this city so unlike any other and such an unparalleled sort of environment for a builder. He walked in, straightened the drop cloth in the front hall, and made his way to the back of the house. He peeked in on Georgie, his Bulgarian carpenter, who was installing new molding near the kitchen. Georgie was a good worker, about 60, barrel-chested and tireless, but Zeitoun knew not to get him talking. Once Georgie started, you were in for a 20-minute discourse on the former Soviet Union, waterfront property in Bulgaria, and the various cross-country motorhome trips with his wife, Albina, who had passed away years ago and was greatly missed. Zeitoun got in his van, and the radio assaulted him with more warnings of the storm called Katrina. It was formed near the Bahamas 2 days earlier, and had scattered boats like toys. Zeitoun took note, but thought little of it. The winds were still many days from being relevant to his life. He made his way to the Presbyterian Museum on Jackson Square, where he had another crew working on a delicate restoration of the 200-year-old building. The museum had been a courthouse long ago and was now home to a vast and extraordinary collection of Mardi Gras artifacts and memorabilia. It was a high-profile job, and Zeitoun wanted to get it right. Kathy called from home. She had just heard from a client in the Broadmoor neighborhood. Zeitoun's men had painted a window shut, and someone needed to come unstick it. I'll go, he said. Easier that way, he figured. He would go. He would do it. It would be done. Fewer phone calls. No waiting. You hear about the winds? Kathy said. Killed 3 in Florida so far. Zeitoun dismissed it. That's not the storm for us. This is not the storm for us, he said. Kathy often poked fun at Zeitoun's stubbornness, at his unwillingness to bow before any force, natural or otherwise, but Zeitoun couldn't help it. He had been raised in the shadow of his father, a legendary sailor who had faced a series of epic trials and had always miraculously survived. Zeitoun's father, Muhammad, had been born not far from Java, on Arwood Island. the only island off Syria, a landmass so small it didn't appear on some maps. There, most boys grew up to be shipbuilders of fishermen. As a teenager, Mahmud began crewing on shipping routes between Lebanon and Syria, large sail-powered cargo boats bringing timber to Damascus and other cities along the coast. He had been on such a ship during World War II, sailing from Cyprus to Egypt. He had his shipmates were vaguely aware of the danger of Axis forces targeting them as potential suppliers to the Allies, but they were astounded when a squadron of German planes appeared on the horizon and bore down on them. Mahmud and the rest of the crew dove into the sea just before the planes began strafing. They managed to detach an inflatable lifeboat before their ship sank, and were crawling into it when the Germans returned. They were intent, it seemed, on killing all the crew members who had survived. Mahmud and his fellow sailors were forced to dive from the dingy and wait underwater until the Germans were satisfied that the crew had all been shot or drowned. When the surface seemed safe again, the sailors returned to their lifeboats and found it full of holes. They stuffed their shirts into the gaps and paddled by hand for miles until they reached the Egyptian shore. But the story Mahmud told most often when Zeitoun was growing up, the story he told when forbidding his children to live on the sea, was this one. Mahmud was returned from Greece on a 36-foot schooner when they sat into a black and torturous storm. They sailed through it for hours until the main mast cracked and dropped the sail into the water, threatening to drag the whole ship into the sea. Without thinking, Mahmud climbed up the mast, intending to free the sail and right the hole. But when he reached the crack in the mast, it gave way completely, and he fell into the ocean. The ship was traveling at 8 knots, and there was no chance of turning it around, so the crew threw out what they could to Mahmud, a few planks and a barrel, and in minutes the boat was gone into the darkness. He was alone at sea for 2 days, the sharks below and storms above, clinging to the remnants of the barrel. When he finally washed ashore near Latakia, 50 miles north of Orward Island, no one, including Mahmud, could believe he had survived, and thereafter he vowed never to take the chance again. He quit sailing, moved his family from Orward onto the mainland, and forbade his children to work on the sea. He wanted good schooling for them all, opportunities apart from fishing and shipbuilding. Mahmud and his wife went looking all over Syria for a new home, a place far from the water. They spent months traveling with their small children, inspecting this town and that house, but nothing seemed right. Nothing, that is, until they found themselves inside a 2-story home, with enough room for all their current and future children. When Mahmud declared that this was the place for them, his wife laughed. They were facing the sea, not 50 feet from shore. There in Jebba, Mahmud opened a hardware store, sent his sons and daughters to the best schools, and taught his boys every trade he could. Everyone knew that Zeitoun, all of them hardworking and quick, and they all knew Abdulrahman, the 8th born, a young man who wanted to know everything and who feared no kind of labor. As a teenager, he watched the tradesmen in town whenever he could, studying their craft, and once they realized he was serious and a quick learner, they teach him whatever they knew. Over the years, he'd learned every trade he could get close to: fishing, ship rigging, painting, framing, masonry, plumbing, roofing, tile work, even auto repair. Zeitoun's father would likely be proud and bemused by the trajectory of his son's life. He hadn't wanted his kids to work on the sea, but many of them, including Zeitoun, had. Mahmud wanted his children to be doctors, teachers. Zeitoun, though, was too much like his father, first a sailor, then to provide for family and to ensure that he lived to watch them grow up, a builder. Zeitoun called Kathy at 11. He'd freed the window to the Broadmoor and was now at Home Depot. "You hear anything new?" he asked. "Looks bad," she said. She was online. The National Hurricane Center had upgraded Katrina to Category 2. They had shifted the possible track of the storm from the Florida Panhandle to the Mississippi-Louisiana coast. The storm was crossing southern Florida with winds around 90 miles an hour. At least 3 people had been killed. Power was out for 1.3 million households. "People here are worried," Zeitoun said, looking around the store. "A lot of people buying plywood. The lines were long. The store was running low on plastic sheeting, duct tape, rope, anything that would protect windows from the winds." "I'll keep watching," Kathy said. In the parking lot, Zeitoun looked to the sky for signs of the coming weather. He saw nothing unusual. As he pushed his cart to his van, a young man pushing his own cart full of supplies approached Zeitoun. "How's business?" the man asked. "Probably an electrician," Zeitoun figured. "Not bad," Zeitoun said. "You?" Could be better, he said, and introduced himself and his trade. He was indeed an electrician. He parked next to Zeitoun and began helping Zeitoun unload his cart. You ever need one? He said. I show up when I say I'll show up, and I finish what I start. He handed Zeitoun his card. They shook hands, and the electrician got into his own van, which Zeitoun noticed was in better shape than his own. Why do you need me? Zeitoun asked. Your van's newer than mine. They both laughed, and Zeitoun put his card on the dashboard and pulled out. He would call the young man, he figured, sooner or later. He always needed electricians, and he liked the man's hustle. When he began working in New Orleans 11 years earlier, Zeitoun labored for just about every contractor in the city, painting, hanging, sheetrock, tiling, anything they needed, until he was hired by a man named Charlie Saucier. Charlie owned his own company, had built it from scratch. He'd become wealthy and was hoping to retire before his knees gave out on him. Charlie had a son in his late teens, and he wanted nothing more than to leave the company to his son. He loved his son, but his son was not a worker. He was shifty and ungrateful. He failed to show up for work, and when he did, he worked listlessly and condescended his father's employees. At the time, Zeitoun didn't have a car, so he rode to Charlie's work sites on a bike, a 10-speed he bought for $40. One day, when Zeitoun was already in danger of being late, the bike blew a tire. After riding on the rim for half a mile, he gave up. He needed to get 4 miles across the city in 20 minutes, and it looked like he would be late for work for the first time in his life. He couldn't leave the bike and run. He needed that bike, and he couldn't ride on a flat tire, so he threw the bike over his shoulder and started jogging. He was panicking. If he was late for this job, what would happen to his reputation? Charlie would be disappointed, and he might not hire him again. And what if Charlie talked to other contractors and found he couldn't recommend Zeitoun? The consequences could be far-reaching. Work was a pyramid. He knew bills one day after solid day. He ran faster. He would be tardy, but if he sprinted, he had a shot at being no more than 15 minutes late. It was August, and the humidity was profound. A mile or so into his run, already soaked in sweat, a truck pulled up next to him. What are you doing? A voice asked. Without breaking stride, Zeitoun turned to see who it was. He figured it was some smart aleck poking fun at the man running along the road with a bike over his shoulder, but instead it was his boss, Charlie Saucier. I'm going to the job, Zeitoun said. He was still running. In hindsight, he should have stopped at this point, but he was in rhythm, and he continued, with the truck puttering beside him. Charlie laughed. Throw your bike in the back. As they drove, Charlie looked over to Zeitoun. You know, I've been at this for 30 years, and I think you're the best worker I've ever had. They were driving to the job site, and Zeitoun had finally managed to relax, knowing he wouldn't be fired that day. I have one guy, Charlie continued. He says he can't come to work because he won't start. I have another guy. He doesn't come because he slept late. He slept late. Another guy, his wife kicked him out of the house or something, so he doesn't show. I have 20 or 30 employees, and 10 of them show up to work any given day. They were at a stop sign, and Charlie took a look at Zeitoun. Then there's you. You have the perfect excuse. All you have to do is bike, and the bike, it has a flat, and you're carrying your bike on your back. You're the only guy I've ever known who would have done something like that. After that day, things moved quickly forward and upward for Zeitoun. Within a year, he had saved enough to buy his own truck. 2 years later, he had worked for himself and employing 12 men. At noon, Zeitoun made his way to the Islamic Center on St. Cloud, a humble-looking mosque and community gathering place downtown. Though his siblings worshipped in a variety of ways, Zeitoun was perhaps the most devout, missing none of his daily prayers. The Quran asks Muslims to worship 5 times daily, once between first light and dawn, again after midday, at mid-afternoon, at sunset, and the lasting hour and a half after sunset. If he found himself near home during the afternoon prayers, he would stop, but otherwise he prayed wherever he was, on any job. He had worshipped all over the city by now, at job sites and parks and in homes of friends, but on Fridays he always stopped here to meet friends for the Jummah, a ritual gathering of all the Muslim men in the community. Inside he first washed in a ritual cleansing called wudu, required of worshippers. Then he began his prayer. In the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful, praise be to God, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, the most beneficent, the most merciful, Master of the day of judgment. You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help. Guide us the straight way, the way of whom you have blessed, none of those who have deserved anger, nor of those who are astray. Afterward, he called Kathy. It'll be a Category 3 soon, she said. Kathy was at home, checking the weather online. Coming at us, he asked. They say it is. When? Not sure. Maybe Monday. Zeitoun dismissed it. Monday to him meant never. This had happened before, Zeitoun noted so many times. The storms always raged across Florida, wreaking havoc, and then died somewhere over land or in the Gulf. Kathy's call waiting went off. She said goodbye to Zeitoun and switched over. It was Rob Stanislaw, a longtime client and friend. You leaving or are you crazy? He asked. Kathy cackled. I want to leave, of course, but I can't speak for my husband. Rob had a similar predicament. His husband, Walt Thompson, was like Zeitoun, bull-headed, always feeling like his information was better than anyone else had access to. Rob and Walt had been together for 15 years and had been close with the Zeitouns since 1997. They had hired the Zeitouns to help with their renovation of a house they'd bought, and immediately the two couples had clicked. Over the years, they'd grown to depend on each other. Walt's family was in Baton Rouge, and it was likely that Rob and Walt would go there for the weekend, he said. Rob and Kathy agreed to update each other throughout the day. She was about to take a break from the internet when something caught her attention. A news item just posted. A family of 5 was missing at sea. The details were few. 2 parents, 3 kids, aged 4, 14, and 17. They had been sailing in the Gulf and had been expected Thursday in Cape Coral, but when the storm came, they had lost contact. Family and friends had notified the Coast Guard, and boats and planes were searching as best they could. That was all that anyone knew for now, and it looked bad. Kathy was a mess. Stories like this just wrecked her. Kathy called her husband. Rob and Walt are leaving. Really? Walt wants to leave? Zeitoun trusted Walt's judgment on just about everything. Kathy thought she might have her husband tilting her way. 15 inches of rain, I hear. Silence from Zeitoun. 25-foot waves, Kathy added. Zeitoun changed the subject. Did you get the declarers to approve the paint sample? I did, Kathy said. Did you hear about the family of 5? He had not. So, in breathless rush, Kathy told him what she knew about the family lost at sea, and their tiny boat swept away in the hurricane, just as Zeitoun might be swept away if he didn't flee its path. We're not at sea, Kathy, Zeitoun said. Zeitoun had spent the better part of 10 years on ships carrying everything from fruit to oil. He worked as a crewman, an engineer, a fisherman. He'd been everywhere from Japan to Cape Town. All along, his brother Ahmad had told him that if a sailor finds the right port or the right woman, he'll drop anchor. In 1988, Zeitoun came to the United States on a tanker carrying oil from Saudi Arabia to Houston. He began working for a contractor in Baton Rouge, and it was there that he met Ahmad, a Lebanese American who became one of his closest friends and the conduit through which he met his bride. Ahmad was working at a gas station at the time, and Zeitoun was hanging drywall. They bonded over common ancestry, and one day Zeitoun asked Ahmad if he knew any single woman who might be appropriate for him. Ahmad was married to a woman named Yuko, an American of Japanese ancestry who had converted to Islam, and Yuko, it turned out, had a friend. Ahmad was conflicted, though, because he liked and trusted Zeitoun and wanted to help. He was hoping his friend of Yuko's might be a match for another friend of his. If it didn't work out between his friend and Yuko's, he said he would surely introduce her to Zeitoun. Zeitoun was willing to respect that boundary, but at the same time, his interest was piqued. Who was the woman who was so prized that Ahmad would not even mention her name? That year, Zeitoun became increasingly determined to find the right woman. He told friends and cousins he was looking for a down-to-earth Muslim woman who wanted a family. Knowing he was serious and hard-working man, they provided many introductions. He was sent to New York to meet the daughter of an acquaintance. He went to Oklahoma to meet the cousin of a friend. He went to Alabama to meet the sister of a co-worker's roommate. Meanwhile, Yuko's friend had been set up with Ahmad's friend, and though they courted for a few months, that relationship came to an end. Ahmad has promised let Zeitoun know that Yuko's friend was now single. It was only then that Zeitoun was told her name, Kathy. Kathy, Zeitoun asked. He hadn't known too many Muslims named Kathy. Kathy what? Kathy Delphine. Ahmad said. She's American? She's from the Baton Rouge. She's converted. Zeitoun was more intrigued than ever. It took a courageous and self-possessed woman to take such a step. But listen, Ahmad said, she's been married. She has a 2-year-old son. This did nothing to dissuade Zeitoun. When can I meet her? He asked. Ahmad told him she worked at a furniture store and gave Zeitoun the address. Zeitoun formulated a plan. He would park out front and observe her unnoticed. This was, he told Ahmad, Jalba's style. He didn't want to make a move or allow anyone representing him to mention his intentions before he could see her. This was the way of doing things where he'd come from. Observe from afar, make inquiries, gather information, then meet. He wanted no confusion, no hurt feelings. He pulled into the furniture store's parking lot at about 5 o'clock one day, planning to wait and watch as she left at the end of her shift. He was settling in for his stakeout when a young woman burst through the door wearing jeans and a hijab. She was striking and very young. She tucked a few strands of her hair into her scarf and looked around the parking lot. And then she was walking again, striding with a powerful confidence, her hands flying about as if she were drying just painted fingernails. Then she broke into a private smile, as if recounting something that had made her laugh. What was it? Zeitoun wondered. She was beautiful, fresh face, and the smile was everything. Wide, shy, electric. I want to make her smile like that, he thought. I want to be the one. I want to be the reason. He liked her more than with every step she took toward him. He was sold. But she was getting too close. She was heading straight for him. Did she know he had come to see her? How was this possible? Someone had told her? Ahmad? Yuko? She was almost at his car. He would look foolish. Why was she coming right at him? He wasn't ready to meet her. Knowing what else to do, he ducked. Crouching below the dashboard, he held his breath and waited. Please, God, he thought, please. Would she pass by, or would she appear at his window, wondering about the man trying to disappear below her? He felt ridiculous. Kathy, though, had no idea she was passing a man hiding under his steering wheel. Her car just happened to be parked next to his. She unlocked her door, got in, and drove off. When she was gone, Zeitoun righted himself, breathed a sigh of relief, and tried to settle his stampeding heart. I need to meet her, he told Ahmad. It was agreed that they would meet at Ahmad and Yuko's house. There would be a casual dinner with Ahmad and Yuko's kids, and Kathy's son Zachary. He would be low pressure, just an opportunity for the two of them to talk a bit, and for Kathy, who had not yet even seen Zeitoun, to meet this man who had inquired about her. When she saw him, she liked his eyes, his handsome, gold-skinned face, but he seemed too conservative, and he was 34 to her 21, well beyond the age she had imagined for a husband. Besides, it had been just 2 years since she left her first marriage, and she felt unready to begin again. She would think of nothing she needed from a man. She could certainly raise Zachary herself. The two of them had become a very good and streamlined team, and there seemed no reason to upset the balance of her life. She couldn't risk the chaos that her first marriage had wrought. After he left that night, Kathy told Yuko that he was a nice enough man, but she didn't think it was a good match. But over the next 2 years, she and Zeitoun saw each other occasionally. He would be at a barbecue at Ahmad and Yuko's, but out of deference to her, he didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. When Kathy arrived, he would leave. He continued to ask about her, and once a year he sent an offhand inquiry through Yuko, just to be sure she hadn't changed her mind. Meanwhile, Kathy's outlook was evolving. As Zachary grew, she began to feel guilty. She would take him to the park and watch the other boys playing with their fathers, and she began to wonder if she was being selfish. A boy needs a dad, she thought. Was it unfair to dismiss the possibility of a father figure in Zachary's life? Not that he was ready to act on these notions, but there was a slow thaw occurring within her. As the years went by, as Zachary turned 3 and then 4, she grew more open to the idea of someone new.